Coming up next is our second and final panel that brings us hopefully into a more positive perspective and a future where democracy will win. I'm deeply grateful to Jeffrey Gedmin, who very bravely jumped in last minute to moderate this conversation between Azar Nafisi and Daniel Ziblatt. And I'm sure he will do an amazing job. Let me just briefly introduce him. Jeffrey Gedmin is the president and CEO of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, a nonprofit international multimedia corporation funded by the US government to produce and communicate relevant news and information about the United States, the region, and the world to an Arabic-speaking audience. Jeffrey served on the International Broadcasting Advisory Board from 2023 to 24, and also served as interim president and president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. We have heard it earlier as well. He has a strong connection to Germany as he received his master and PhD in German area studies and linguistics. And for 5 years, he acted as president of the Aspen Institute in Berlin. He's the author and editor of several books on Germany and European security, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he serves on many advisory boards, such as the Justice for Journalists Foundation. I can't list all his achievements and positions today, so I would just like to conclude that he's currently also a research council member at the National Endowment for Democracy. Dear Jeffrey, we are so glad to have you here. Please come to the front and bring along your panelists Azar Nafisi and Daniel Ziblatt. Welcome.
So, what a day. This has been so rich and so stimulating and demanding, and these two will never let you down. I'll do my best to do the same. So, first of all, in spring 1938, I'm bad at arithmetic, but 83 years ago, I think, Thomas Mann was on tour in the United States, speaking about a publication called The Coming Victory of Democracy. And he was in Boston, and he was in New York, he was in Chicago and Tulsa, he was in San Francisco, back here on the East Coast, he was in Washington, D.C. And what an extraordinary time. His publication was praised and commended by Eleanor Roosevelt. Thousands were showing up across the country because there was this intense curiosity and passion for liberal democracy. And what did Thomas Mann do? Of course, he condemned Nazism, but he was also issuing a call for action on behalf of militant democracy, humanism, and, in my words, robust social democracy. I think the conference today, the topic today, one of the great scholars of Thomas Mann today, is a perfect framing to try to help us understand what's happening across the West and certainly in the United States. As Mark Twain put it, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And so that's in part what this discussion is about today. Oliver and your colleagues at the Thomas Mann House and the Goethe Institute, what a fabulous day in terms of organization. And I have to say, in thinking up Daniel and Azar for this panel, if you know them and know their writing, it's a stroke of genius. I can't think of two better people, and then to have a chance to hear you two interact. And Azar, thank you for being here. And Daniel, you flew in today. I think you may even fly out today. So thank you for your valuable time. Azar, you are a distinguished writer, scholar, poet. You were born in Tehran. You came to this country to study. You came to this country to live, starting in 1997. You became a U.S. citizen in 2008, and we all know you through these fabulous works like Reading Lolita in Tehran and a number of other books that explore, among other things, the role of fiction in liberal democracy, in civil society, in stimulating imagination, to borrow from one of your books, the creative space that allows political pluralism to flourish. You all know Daniel. He is a political scientist in comparative politics at Harvard. Harvard has something to say about today's debates. as you know. He is the author of a 2018 book with a colleague, Stephen Levitsky, on how democracies die. He is the author of I read it, it's a lengthy essay. I don't know how he got 2,400 words in the New York Times, but look at Thursday, he did, with two colleagues, on how can you tell when we're moving into authoritarianism, because oftentimes today, it's not the dictatorship of our grandfathers. Tanks in the street, the president is removed, the new dictator is in power. It's softer, it's more, well, maybe it's not softer. It's more devious, arguably, incremental, and then suddenly there you are. We're going to decide where we are today. I'm going to start by reading a very, very short letter, and then I'm going to ask Azar first and Daniel second to comment on it. So here it goes.
Daniel first.
Well, I thought ladies first.
How do you like that?
We're going to draw straws. You two can argue over that, but I'm going to read it. Here it goes. This is January 20th, 1993, and Bill Clinton is arriving as the new president of the United States, and departing is George Herbert Walker Bush. And George H.W. Bush left on the desk of the Oval Office a handwritten note. Let me read it to you. To then President Clinton. Dear Bill, when I walked into this office just now, I felt the same sense of wonder and respect that I felt 4 years ago. I know you will feel that too. I wish you great happiness. I never felt the loneliness some presidents have described. There will be very tough times for you, made even more difficult by criticism you may not think fair. I'm not very good to give advice, says George Herbert Walker Bush. But don't let the critics get you down or push you off course. He finishes. When you read this, you will be our president. I wish you well. Your success now is the country's success. I'm rooting hard for you. Signed, good luck, George. So you two decide who wants to go first, but my question to you is this mere courteousness, or does it signal or speak to something larger? Okay. And then in spirit, is such a letter possible today? Okay, Daniel, go first.
Yeah, in our various conversations, you always say gentlemen first, so I'll go first. So, yeah, thanks everybody for being here on this beautiful day, and thank you for the conversation and for the invitation to participate. Yeah, I think there is something significant in that letter. Democracy is about competition in large part. It's people engaged in struggles for power. That's why we have elections. They can be brutal. They can be tough. But what contains competition, what makes it not degenerate into something that's violent or something that is ultimately destructive, are a set of unwritten rules. And this may be, the appeal to reason. What is reason? That's shown up on the board here a couple of times today. I think there's two unwritten rules that have a lot to do with reason. One is a norm that is necessary for democracy. It's not written down anywhere. The norm of mutual toleration. In our book, we call this mutual toleration, which essentially is the idea that you may not really like the other side. You certainly may disagree with the other side. But everybody, when they compete for office, they have a right to. Everybody has a right to compete for office, and when they win, they have a right to govern, even if you don't like it. So you have to publicly accept, in a sense, what you privately may despise. And so, George H. Walker Bush didn't really run a very nice campaign against Bill Clinton, right? But then the moment came, and he said, "This is in order for our democracy to survive. We need to kind of." That's so he was demonstrating that first unwritten rule, this norm of toleration, and toleration is not loving the other side. It's simply accepting the other side has a right to compete. That they may be right, I may be wrong. The second unwritten norm, I would say, or unwritten rule that this is demonstrating that that Bush was abiding by here was the norm of forbearance, which is also really essential for democracy. And forbearance can mean different things. Sometimes it's not a great attribute, but I think in a democracy, what forbearance has, in politics, when you occupy an office like a president or a king or any kind of important office, you have incredible power, incredible formal power. And if you use it to the max, it can be incredibly destructive. But what democracy requires, and this again is a kind of reason, I would say, is to act with self-restraint and to say that I'm not going to use a self-conscious underutilization of power. So if you are leaving office, you could sort of figure out ways to keep yourself in office. It may or may not be legal, but you have the resources potentially to do that. But actually, he's active in this kind of generous spirit, in a way. He's sort of showing forbearance. So I would say these two norms of mutual toleration and forbearance are on display here, and these are essential for a democracy.
Thank you. Azar, could you speak to that? And in your writings, you've talked at times about how important, I should say, Daniel is a scholar in comparative politics, but you have lived experience in comparative politics, because an important reference point for you is the theocracy of Iran. Talk to us a little bit about the power of language and why it's important in a democratic society to distinguish between your competitor and your rival, and then, let's say, genuine enemies who espouse fundamentally different illiberal or authoritarian values. Could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for making this possible. I just wanted to share one thing with you. I was looking last night at my notes, and I noticed that I put a line, I've written a line over there, which is from the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. He says, walk on the sky against your better judgment. And this is the kind of thing that you can't explain because you're feeling it. It comes from the heart, and what you asked about life in the Islamic Republic, for us, it was not just a political act. I mean, standing up to the regime went far beyond a political gesture or action. It was existential. We literally fought for our existence. And that I don't mean that only the tortures and the killings and all of that, but it goes deeper than that. And it affects every single citizen. What they do, totalitarian mindsets, when they come to power, the first thing that they do is confiscate your history. Then they confiscate your reality, they confiscate your culture, and they confiscate you as an individual. So it is not like when we were fighting against the Shah in pre-revolutionary times, where we were basically against his politics. But this went far beyond that. I mean, as a woman, as a teacher, as a writer, as a believer in human rights, I hated myself because I had to acquiesce. I mean, you can't not acquiesce in one sense, because as a friend said, drinking a glass of water, you have to have permission from someone else, So for us, we discovered that one way of resisting was to be more ourselves and to not giving. For 45 years, this regime tried to put the veil on women, the mandatory veil on Iranian women. For 45 years, Iranian women resisted. And in the recent years, what they did, which maybe we need to think when we talk about resistance, what they did was they came into the streets singing and dancing. The regime beat them to death. They had BB guns, which they shoot into their eyes to blind them. You have this picture of the wonderful Iranian women all standing and smiling with a white patch over their eyes. They killed people for not wearing the hijab. And what did Iranian women do? They came into the streets and they covered the sound of the bullets by the sound of their singing. And the regime couldn't do anything about them. So I recommend you read Daniel's op-ed in New York Times about how you find ways of not appeasing the regime, and how you mentioned that resistance should be collective. What do you mean by that, that resistance should be collective?
Azar, thank you. Daniel, back to your piece, Thursday in the New York Times. Where are we exactly? We're not at the theocracy of Iran. You use a term, a collocation, competitive authoritarianism. How do you assess where we are? Where are the alarm bells and the red lines? Before we get to what we do, describe where we are first.
Well, the premise of that's the question, that's the title of the article. How would we recognize it? How seriously should we take it? And I think, all of us feel this great uncertainty and this does bring me back to Thomas Mann a little bit, because there's this question of you don't want to overreact, but you also don't want to underreact, and there's always going to be uncertainty. And, so people flee the country because they think that they're at great risk. Other people say, oh, you're overreacting. And, we all know this. We all probably go through this process in our own heads when you read the newspaper. How serious is this? So one very simple metric that we propose is that in a full democracy, you shouldn't pay a significant price for being critical of the government. And if you have to pay a price, that means if you lose funding, you lose access to carry out the normal business that you're doing because you're critical of the government, then you're not living in a full democracy. And I think we've begun to see that. I mean, you mentioned Harvard. Harvard University lost $2 billion by responding to the letter from the Trump administration saying we're not going to comply with this. So that's literally paying a price. But of course, across many organizations, we see this. Very much associated with that is that there then is a kind of fear. There's a fear when you have to ask yourself, is it really worth speaking up about this? When you have to think twice about being critical and saying things in public, then that means you're not really living in a full democracy. So this is very different. This is not people being, this is not then the kind of classic authoritarianism. But these are these very subtle markers that I think at least give me pause that we're not, I don't think we're in a kind of full-blown authoritarian regime, but we're experiencing, the kind of most optimistic version of this is to say we're living in an authoritarian fantasy. I mean, that there's some effort to impose authoritarianism on us. And so it doesn't mean, just because I'm pointing out that people think twice, I'm not saying that we should say, oh my goodness, well, I guess I better not say anything. It's just that that's sort of the reality in which we're in, and how we respond to this is a different question.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, it seems to me that many of these things, it's hard to resolve at the level of abstraction, We believe in liberal democracy, we fight against authoritarianism, but then when you get down to individuals, and I know this in earliest days of my career as a young American, in a different setting, I traveled a lot to Eastern Europe in the waning days of communism. And those countries still functioned by the 1,000 little compromises that everybody made every day in an isolation. It was not entirely illegitimate because people have kids. Or the Stasi comes and knocks on your door in East Germany, in Leipzig Airport, wherever, and you're strong, until they say, how's your mom doing? She gets that heart medicine once a week at the pharmacy down the street, right? It'd be terrible if that ran out. 1,000 little compromises that in practical reality, it's easy to say, we resist, we're strong. Can you talk to us, I'll come to Azar too, but talk to us a little bit about where you think the culture is going in education, where you think the culture is going in civil society, where you think the culture is going in the pro-democracy community. We had a conversation earlier today about when does a professor decide, it's not an easy answer, when does a professor decide, I'm starting to self-censor myself a little bit, you know? Got to have funding, right? Can't hurt my colleagues, right? Can't hurt my kids. When do you think, directly or gently, maybe it's a good time to take a fellowship in Germany for a couple of years? Can you think that through with us, please?
Yeah, so, you know, there's this great German phrase, vorauseilende Gehorsam, so preemptive abdication. Yeah. And, you know, that's what you're describing in part. And I think one thing I've discovered that I hadn't realized just in the last 100 days, something I've learned in the last 100 days, is that it's very contagious. And so what I mean by that is that if you're in an organization, you look to what other organizations, peer institutions are doing. That's the first thing you do. Well, how is our rival, our competitor, or somebody who cooperate with responding? And maybe they have some insight. That's one way in which it's contagious. Second way, it's and autocrats know that, so they like to make examples of very prominent cases to send the signal. A second way in which it's contagious is it travels down within an organization. You know, so you know, the presidential administration may say something to the president of a university, who then says something to the dean, who then says something to center directors, and everybody says, "Well, okay, I don't really believe this," but at each level, but they're putting pressure on me, so I guess this is the way that I can kind of compromise a little bit because they're compromise. You know, I'm not sure if they really believe it or what, and so it travels through organizations as well. But what was the first part of you're saying how well, I guess
how do you think about resolving dilemmas? Yeah. Because it's not so simple that there's a trigger. Yes. I go. It's obvious. Yes. I go now.
Well, one thing. I mean, so this comes to your question about the collective response. I mean, for any the dilemma in a way is for any individual. This is a classic collective action problem, as social scientists call it. For any individual, the price of standing up is very high, and the cost of abdicating a little bit isn't that high. And so as a result of that, you make this calculation. And I think the most pernicious part of it is that you try to justify it and say, well, actually, this is the wiser strategy. You know, this is the prudent strategy to not push back too overtly. And, you know, maybe not, you know, having a confrontation is like strategically the right thing to do. And it may be. I mean, in some instances, you know, maybe the university president shouldn't take a big stand. But I think we should always be very self-critical to realize that it's very easy. It's much easier to sort of convince yourself that this is the more prudent, more rational strategy. And I think one can justify it, but you should be aware of what you're doing. And so the answer to your question of how to resolve this, one answer is to kind of defray the costs if one works collectively. That's why it's so important that that's why, you know, organizations cooperate. That's you know, across law firms, across universities, across different sectors, because if everybody stands up, then the individual costs for each individual for defiance, the cost of defiance in that sense become a little bit less. And so, you know, what forms that takes, you know, we could talk about that, but that's sort of the general principle that I would work with.
Thank you. Azar, can we shift just a little bit to the role of literature and culture and the arts, both in the flourishing of liberal democracy and civil society, but also in terms of resistance? In one of your books, you say that in totalitarian states like Iran, the rulers pay too much attention to literature and culture, and often in free democratic societies, we pay too little attention. Could you speak to that?
Yes, actually, I wanted to today that one gentleman with his question and comment, he mentioned Salman Rushdie, and I'd like to use the the truth about Salman Rushdie in order to explain why literature is so powerful and why is it so poisonous to totalitarian mindsets. Were you going to, oh, no. Okay. When we think of Salman Rushdie and the fact that there was the fatwa against him, now the question comes, this man, his only weapon is his words. He doesn't have a big military behind him. He doesn't have militia protecting him. He is just one man with, if not a pen, his computer, and that's what he is. And yet, he becomes so dangerous, so threatening, that one of the most powerful men in the world cannot live with Salman Rushdie living. That is the power of literature. And why is it that literature becomes so powerful? It is in competition with the totalitarian mindset. And totalitarians, whether in United States of America or Islamic Republic of Iran, they begin their reign with fabrications, with lies. They live on lies. They have to rebuild the world through their eyes. And that is why, as a woman, I was saying I hated myself, because when I would go by the mirror and put that mandatory hijab on, I all of a sudden feel that this is not me. This is someone else. It is almost like death, a different kind of death, you know, that they're imposing upon the Iranian people. So literature reveals the truth. And that is so dangerous to any to any totalitarian mindset. Revelation of the truth. It is also dangerous for us, the readers, because once you know the truth, you cannot remain silent. If you remain silent, that means that you are complicit in the crime that is being implemented against you. So it is not just Mr. Trump who should pay attention. I think we should pay even more attention. Now, fiction by nature, great fiction, is democratic. It is multivocal. All the characters in the book, they have a voice. The writer has to go under the skin of every character in order to give them a fair share. Even the villain gets the chance to explain himself, because novel is not built on well, I don't know if I can find the right term for it, but the novel is democratic because of this multivocality, and that is exactly what a totalitarian mindset avoids doing. What else did you no? Okay.
So, Azar, before we go back to Daniel, in these still early days of the Trump administration, the interest in culture, cultural institutions, Library of Congress, Kennedy Center, does that surprise you? Do you think this is an expression of deep narcissism, or does it have a larger political significance that Donald Trump wants to be chairman of the Kennedy Center?
I think it's an inferiority complex. He feels inferior. And the only, you see, that is the problem with these people. They can't, I mean, Donald Trump cannot have an exchange with you, but he can fabricate you. He can remake you and then talk to you, because then he's the bully, he's the one on top, and we are down here. And that is why his second election became a retribution. I mean, he wants to take revenge on all those people who took him lightly. He doesn't want to, and he's very successful in one sense. He's doing a job. Part of it is because of the seduction of totalitarianism. You know, once you are appeasing the totalitarian ruler, you are giving him the permission to reconstruct you. And that is what Donald Trump is trying to do. But one of the things you mentioned about cultural institutions, when I came to this country, I was so joyous at discovering the three endowments: National Endowment for Democracy, for Humanities, for Art. What better way of explaining a democracy than by these three? This is what Jefferson would love, would predicted Jefferson. And then what happened when I came to this country? I also noticed lessening of attention to arts and humanities. I discovered that universities have become, I mean, universities are a place of knowledge. And knowledge, like justice, is blind. It doesn't ask you where you come from. Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? None of these things. Knowledge is there for you. Its award is in attaining it. It is based on two important human traits. One is curiosity, and the other one is empathy. Imaginative knowledge is a way of perceiving the world, relating to the world, and changing the world. And that is what our universities were supposed to do. But they became a place where we were carrying a war through our words, and we ourselves were becoming violent, while one of the lessons you learn about fighting for democracy is not to become like your enemy, not to do what they do. And here we were, both the right and the left were censoring one another. You would take evolution out of the educational system. And it reminds me of the Islamic Republic of Iran. You know, the main censor for theater in the Islamic Republic of Iran was blind. He would sit in the theater, someone would sit beside him, and he would say, now the girl is being approached by the guy, now cut. And then what he had done, he would ask the playwrights to read their plays into a tape, but to not show any emotion, to just read it. And he would listen to it on the way going home. The next, he was then gone from the theater. He became the head of a new channel for the television. And the guy who replaced him would also ask the player, he was not blind physically, but he would ask the playwrights to do the same thing. They would put hijab on female chickens in children's stories. I don't know how they decided which one was female and which one was male. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the big problems for Iranian children. They didn't know which one was which. But, you know, this is it. We laugh, and it is funny, but it is tragic. The fact that this person has the say over my life or death. Now, what I saw in American colleges, and I think one thing that really made what is happening now easy, was the fact that everybody wanted to be comfortable. They kept saying, people kept telling you, I'm not comfortable for this. This is offensive to me. And how do you deal with something that's not, this one disturbs me. Well, you go and read James Baldwin, who says artists are here to disturb the peace. Artists are not here to become aspirin to your headache. They are here to disturb you, to give you an alternative eye with which to see the world. And so that was taken away from the universities. That generation that came out of the universities knew very little about its own history, never mind history of the world. I remember in one of my classes at Johns Hopkins SAIS, I mentioned, at a master's class, I mentioned de Tocqueville, and a blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl put her hand up and said, who is de Tocqueville? How could you be faithful to a country if you don't know its history? How can you have it as your own if you can't have its history? Sorry, I get carried away.
You should. Beautiful. Azar, thank you. Thank you. That's clear, eloquent, passionate. Thank you. Daniel, we want to move a little bit. Oliver instructed me we can't end on a downer.
We're running out, and as in our politics, we're running out of time here.
I know. So for that, we'll take 3 more hours to get there. On history, let me ask you a question about recent history, and then we'll pivot to the way ahead and draw on history and Thomas Mann and comparative politics. But my question about recent history is this. It seems to me that Donald J. Trump didn't drop out of the sky. He came from us. He's part of us, from our culture, politics, and society. If you go back to 2016, the 2 candidates that did exceptionally well in the primaries were Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And then people say to me, well, they have nothing in common. But they were the 2 candidates running against the establishment, elites, the status quo, respectively, Washington and Wall Street. Tell us something a little bit about how in the world we got here, because as you and I discussed during the coffee break, there's a role to tackle this through civil society, the political parties, but voters actually have a voice in this. How did we get here?
Actually, and it's since COVID in particular. I mean, I just recently was trying to calculate this, and there's been some good reporting in the Financial Times about this. I think it's something like 19 of the last 23 elections incumbents have lost around the world. So this is a common trend. You know, you think of Olaf Scholz in Germany, the Conservative Party in Britain. So it's really, and what's happened in the United States, we've had these fluctuations. And so there's a general kind of sense in which voters are pretty grumpy and not happy with the status quo. And this is relatively new. I mean, people always vote out incumbents, but at an increased rate. And so in some ways, 2016 may have been the beginning of that. But I think my sense is that, and I'm not sure why this is, that the COVID experience in some ways accelerated this. So, you know, what voters are supposed to do when they're not happy with the status quo is vote the incumbents out. That's how it's supposed to work in a democracy. So it's at some level that if people weren't happy with the Biden administration, then they should vote for the opposition candidate. So that's not really the problem. That's like the self-correcting genius of democracy. The question is what's on the menu? What are the choices that are on the menu? And how does that get determined? I mean, this is part of the process, I think, of why we're in this unusual circumstance in the United States, because we have a two-party system. So if you're not happy with the status quo, you vote for the other side. And you're not voting for authoritarianism. You're voting for a set of other things that might be motivating you. And so I think here is where voters certainly play a role, but I don't think we can blame our voters. I think there's a much more important role to be played by political elites and social elites to call out when abuses take place. I mean, we need a two-party system. We can't have a system in which Democrats win forever. We can't. I mean, you have to have at least two parties alternating for office. And so, I think we need to have a better collective understanding of what kind of behavior in our political leaders is unacceptable. And so, for example, in our book, we point out, drawing on the scholarship of Juan Linz, who was a Spanish political scientist who was born in Weimar, Germany, grew up in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, so lived through the period of Mauan, and then wrote in the 1970s, he said there's sort of key criteria that we can use to decide whether a politician is democratic. Just being elected doesn't make then everything you do democratic. And that's actually a really important point, because often there's sort of this idea, well, I've been elected, so I can do whatever I want. If you condone violence and try to use violence to gain under power, that's just out of bounds in a democracy. If you attack the civil liberties of your fellow citizens, that's just out of bounds in a democracy. If you don't accept election outcomes when they're free and fair and try to cast doubt on them, that's just out of bounds in a democracy. These aren't my criteria. These are the criteria that Juan Linz used writing in the 1970s, reflecting back on the 1930s. So we've in some ways forgotten that. I think the role here, so voters certainly need to know this, but I think at some level, people who know better, political elites, people within the same political party, we call these kind of gatekeepers sometimes. I mean, the gatekeepers need to call this stuff out. And that's easier said than done. And I guess one way to think about it is that there's certain moments where it's easier to do this than in others. So I think today, if you're a Republican, a member of Congress, and you really, in your private moments, don't like what's happening, it's very hard to speak out against this. But January 2021 would have been a moment where it could have made sense to do this and say this is beyond the pale. So there are certain moments, there's openings that come along where there's some kind of crisis, where people's judgment, voters' judgments of things are a little bit in flux. And in those moments in particular, I think there's a real responsibility of political leadership to call certain things out. And my sense is that had in January 2021, the Republican establishment responded to those events more cohesively, more uniformly, condemned it, that we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in today. So I think there was and so you may think, well, is that realistic? Well, I'll tell you, in Brazil, the Bolsonaro, what I think New York Times called the Trump of the tropics. When he lost an election, he claimed he didn't lose the election. His party allies came out immediately and said he lost the election. When his supporters attacked government buildings, his party allies and allies condemned it. And he was banned from running for office, and he's now out of office. And so for at least in the short run, another path was possible.
Thank you. Can we take a couple questions, Oliver? Does that suit you? Let's take a couple questions. I'm bringing you a microphone. Lasser, there you go.
Thanks very much. My name's John Emerson. I was Barack Obama's ambassador to Germany and a veteran of the Clinton White House. And your comments about norms, I think, are so powerful. Just as an example, there's no law that says somebody in the White House or the president can't talk to the Justice Department about an investigation. But if any of us who are working there did that, immediate firing offense, right? That's obviously changed. But what has struck me recently is the extent to which the norms of behavior are critical for checks and balances to work, not just democracy, but the checks and balances. And you commented on what's happening with the Republicans in Congress. I never would have predicted that you would see the leaders of the legislature allow the executive to trample over legislative prerogative like we are seeing. That has never happened, at least in my lifetime, when I've been, following this stuff. And I guess the question is, once we get past this, and I'm optimistic, we will get past this at some point. What do we need to do? Do we need to make these norms laws? I mean, what do we need to do to sort of protect against this happening again?
Should I answer that or collect? Yeah,
Please.
yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, a president in principle could govern by executive order all the time, but that usually has not happened. And so it can pardon anybody he or she wants at any time, and that's generally not happened. So these things are all kind of these kind of soft guardrails, as we call them. Actually, there's a recent book that's come out by a friend, Corey Brettschneider, I think it's called "The Presidents Against the People." And what he does is he goes back through American history and looks at 5 different presidents who attacked democracy or attacked the Constitution, at least. And he says that after each of these moments, there was a kind of recovery period. And so the most recent one being the Nixon era and the post-Watergate reforms. And often what the reforms entail is hardening the guardrails, that is passing laws to make it harder to do these. And I think part of the problem, this is all systems require an unwritten rules. I often tell my students when I describe this, there's nothing on the syllabus saying you can't get up and throw tomatoes at me, right, in class, but you don't do it. Or you don't talk to each other in class. I don't tell you not to. It's nothing in the Constitution, in the syllabus saying this. But so you can't design a rule for every circumstance. But I think the U.S. system is particularly vulnerable to this because our Constitution is so hard to change. It's the hardest Constitution in the world to change. So as a result of that, only been amended, a couple of dozen times. The Norwegian Constitution, which is only 15 years older than ours, or ours is only 15 years older than the Norwegian Constitution, has been amended over 200 times. So you can develop formal rules to deal with these things. We haven't relied on that. We've relied on these unwritten rules. And so our system really has depended on those. And so you can pass things through legislation, though. And so I think the idea, conflict of interest rules, for instance. A lot of these things that passed after the Watergate era was done in an incomplete fashion. It never is complete. But that's what is going to need to happen, is that we're going to go through a period of recovery where we need to be aware of all these vulnerabilities that have been exposed by an ambitious president who wants to concentrate power and to kind of find ways of limiting those things.
So I won't, please. Kimberly.
So, Azar, I think you said, or maybe it was you, Daniel, who said you just can't, you can't mirror the way these bad governments work. But when we finally do get through this, we're going to be in a situation where we have a government in which essentially all kind of normal, democratic thinking people have been cleansed and replaced by loyalists, because loyalty is the key factor. So if you don't want to mirror what happened, some of them will have to leave at the end of government, many will burrow in, but then you have what I will call these nonpartisan, independent institutions, of which there are many, and it's part of the bipartisan foundation where each president gets to appoint a certain number of members of those councils and commissions, which are really the underlying basis for how our government works. And they're balanced, or they've been balanced, because you have Democrats that are there, which Biden appointed, and now when somebody terms off, then Trump gets to appoint somebody. But he's firing everybody now, and he's replacing them with loyalists. So then you're going to end up with this lopsided government. How should we address that if we don't want to be a mirror image of them?
Would like to take that? Azar?
Well, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, but just one thing I will say, I think this is a kind of frontier issue of dealing with populist authoritarians. And one place that has gone through this just in the last 2 years is Poland, where you had a kind of packing of the state by a populist authoritarian party. A kind of a liberal government, broadly speaking, came into power, and immediately they were constrained by the fact that the courts, the bureaucracy, all the cultural institutions, media institutions, the equivalents of our Library of Congress, our National Endowments for the Humanities, all of these institutions had been filled over a long time period. So they've exactly faced this dilemma. Do we use those same methods or not? And that's exactly the debate. And I'm not sure if they've actually, I don't know what the answer to the question is, I'll say, but except to say that that's the place. Yeah, that's the place to look. That's the place to look. I mean, but I guess one thing I would say is that the longer, when this time comes to Hungary, for instance, where the Fidesz party has been in power since 2010, that's going to be a much, much steeper hill to climb. Whereas in Poland, this is a much shorter term, and so less damage was done. I guess one thing I would say is that one practical idea is, I'm thinking about the National Institutes of Health. So it's being dismantled, money's being cut. One very practical idea I've had, and I tell this to people, is maybe we need to, instead of sort of saying, well, okay, we're not going to fund science for the next 4 years, and let's wait 4 years and then figure out what to do next. I mean, that's sort of totally self-destructive, and it's also killing all of the research. There are institutions available in the United States. We have a federal system. California's the 5th largest economy in the world. If you look at the states, there's a lot of resources in the states. What if we were to create something called the American Institutes of Science, that was made up of state governments, or in fact, any jurisdiction, cities, the city of Houston could participate if it wants, and any contributing member, scientists who are in that jurisdiction can apply for funding from this fund of this fund. And it maybe is, the one problem with this is that states have balanced budget rules, so they don't have access to the same kind of revenue, but at least provide some kind of bridge funding for scientists so that these projects don't need to come to an immediate halt, and provide some continuous framework that's within our system, constitutional. States can spend their money how they want, and that, so when 4 years comes, we're not starting from scratch. So that's a kind of way of thinking about, trying to think creatively about the institutions and the resources we have to, in some sense, almost create parallel legal structures.
That also speaks to, I think, part of the dilemma. I'm going to ask you this, Azar, and maybe we have one more question. There's I suppose it's in life, an immense advantage to those who set the agenda. And this administration is fabulous in setting the agenda. And now we're all, in my view, understandably lost in the tasks and tactics of reaction. How will we stop them from dismantling, defunding, destroying? It's necessary, but could you talk to us a little bit, Azar, about how we shift and pivot to an agenda through the arts, through culture, through political parties, through civil society, through literature, so that those on the other side have to react and respond to us, what we will do next. You've surely, I know you've thought about this in terms of Iran because you're a public intellectual and writer, but you've also been a voice for Iranian civil society and opposition. How do we get back to a positive agenda with our own vision and own strategy to restore liberal democracy? Not just to block or impede what's being done, but to push back and set our own agenda.
Well, one thing that we can do is take the attention, not give all the attention to Trump and his cronies, but bring back the attention to ourselves.
It seems to me that this becomes a big and central problem. And as long as that other side remains so relentless, and so you've given us a creative idea, and so agenda setting is going to be very difficult to do anything other than play defense for the next 3 years.
What I wanted to say about what he said, he mentioned the fact that we criticize others, but we don't criticize ourselves. I think if there is any hope for what is happening right now. If there's any hope, it is for us to look at ourselves, because in times of crisis, we're given the opportunity, which we don't have at other times, to not just reflect, but self-reflect, not just criticize, but self-criticize. And we have taken that agency away from ourselves. One seductive aspect of totalitarianism is that it makes decisions for you. You know, Saul Bellow used to say, those who have survived the ordeal of Holocaust, how will they survive the ordeal of freedom? Because we have forgotten that freedom is, in fact, needs nurture. Democracy is very difficult. Actually, sometimes it's easier to live under an authoritarian rule because they make all the decisions for you because you're not responsible. In democracy, whatever you do, you are responsible for your actions. And we have forgotten that. Bellow also used to say that Stalin, it was very obvious in terms of his crimes. We all know it. But what threatens a democratic society is its sleeping consciousness and its atrophy of feeling. And one thing that I have felt in this country is that there is a sort of weariness, a sort of, I don't know whether...
Yeah, this brings me back a little bit to Mann. I mean, when we read these essays and listen to these speeches, the thing from Mann, the thing that I'm most struck by is how, in a sense, kind of muscular the conception of democracy and how self-confident the argument for democracy is as a form of civilization. And, you know, I think that's something that we have lost to some degree is our own arguments for democracy. Why is this something worth sacrificing for? And, you know, ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice for? And why are you willing to sacrifice? And so I think, you know, all of us need to think about ways. I mean, this is what I spend some of my time thinking about is, you know, what are the best arguments for democracy and to make the best positive case for it. And you know, and I think there are good arguments to be made, but that's something I think that we can learn from Mann.
I'm going to indulge myself and tell a very short story and then thank our colleagues and give it back to Oliver. Agency, it's such a fabulous word. It's a powerful word. We overlook the word. We have agency, individually, collectively, in small groups. Right before the fall of the Berlin Wall and right before the Velvet Revolution in the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, if you remember that. I remember being in Prague. Raise your hand if you've been to Prague. Most of you have been to Prague. And you know, Wenceslas Square and that iconic figure in Czech mythology and the statue. And here's what happened. It's a story of agency, gestures, very powerful. One day, someone walking to work in the morning took a bouquet of flowers and put it at the foot of the statue of King Wenceslas. The next day, someone came along and said, that's a good idea. I'm going to put a bouquet of flowers there. On the third day, there were 10 bouquets. And into the next week, piles and piles of flowers. What happened? The Czech secret police took away the flowers and put a fence around it because they understood it as a gesture of independence, of sovereignty, of self-worth, of identity. They were just flowers. It got the point of the Czech secret police, but of the whole community, because everybody in Prague is talking about it. Agency. You have been a wonderful audience. Where's Oliver? I've lost Oliver. He's somewhere. But before I give the floor back to Oliver and the other colleagues, forgive me, we've had a fabulous day. We're very grateful to Goethe Institute, Thomas Mann House, USC, and Azar and Daniel. What a pleasure. Thank you both. Thanks, everybody.
have to disappoint you. It's not Oliver, it's me, it's Klaus. That's all right. That's all right. You took the words right out of my mouth. Congratulations, audience, for staying with us, for participating in this event. I do hope you are as inspired and touched as I am with the substance of the event, the beauty of the event, the care with which this event was organized, and may I say, the love that went into the event. But before I thank him further and try to contextualize a little bit, one more round of applause for Azar, for Jeff, and for Daniel. During the opening remarks, I said, well, strangely enough, this event is positioned at the end of a very eventful week. Germans woke up about a week ago with a 1,100 pages long report from the Federal Agency for the Protection of the Constitution, Bundesamt für den Verfassungsschutz, yes, there we go, finding that Germany's largest opposition party is an extreme right-wing party. And there's discussions now whether this should be banned, this party should be banned. Maybe it needs an appeal to reason. We woke up on Tuesday morning when we almost failed to form a government, half a year after the last government blew up. It actually blew up on the day that Trump was re-elected, on the 6th of November. It was on knife's edge. The day after, we woke up and we found an American Pope. Quite unthinkable. And he didn't say buonasera, he said peace be with you. Well, I thought that was a very nice message, right? The one thing that was predictable about this event was the timing. An appeal to reason timed very, very closely to the day where we all celebrate the liberation of Europe from Nazi rule. I think that needs to be mentioned as well. Another completely unpredictable and very sad event occurred last night. Has not much to do with this, but I still feel the urge to mention this. Thomas Mann came to the US, he went back to Europe. Margot Friedländer was one of the oldest and most active and most articulate surviving Holocaust survivors. She was born in Berlin in 1921. She came to New York City in 1946 and decided to go back to Germany, to Berlin in 2010. Why? Because she felt she had to tell the story of survival, the story of remembrance, the story of not closing the books of what happened between 1933 and 1945. And she never stopped telling this story until only a very few weeks ago. Unfortunately, Margot Friedländer died last night in Berlin, in her home city, at the tender age of 103 years. Some of you may have met her. I had the honor and the pleasure to meet her, and I think I can say that we're all very, very saddened. Democracy will win, an appeal to reason. But now, and I said, you will be rewarded very soon with an ascent to the penthouse of this beautiful building and some beautiful finger food, as my friend Oliver said. Just a few words of thank you. Oh God, where do I start? All the speakers in appearance, of course. Hans Vaget, what a wonderful account of Thomas's life, his connection to Washington, his connection to Los Angeles. The reading from Renea Brown, she's probably not with us anymore here today. The power of the pen with Summer Lopez and Kimberly Marteau, amazing. The coffee break, also very delightful, right? Kokai, and it says on my paper, please mention, Klaus. I always get these papers and then I forget something. But Teddy, don't forget it. Please mention that Kokai's piece will be at the Hirshhorn Museum later this month. You were all witness of a world premiere. And this is going to the Hirshhorn Museum, which is amazing. And finally, let me say that again. we wanted to end on an optimistic note, and on a thoughtful note, and appeal to reason. Democracy will win. Thank you so much, Azar. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Daniel. There you go, all the speakers, but now the organizers. And then it's over, all right? Organizers from the Thomas Mann House, and maybe you can sort of show yourself again, because we love to see you, Oliver. Oliver and Clara, all right. And Benno Hertz, who's not with us today. From the University of Southern California, Capitol Campus, Wolf Gruner and Michaela Ullmann. Where are you? Professor Wolf Gruner, Michaela Ullmann. Sydney Wally, Director Events of Communication, and Michael Kurtzke. He's the one who came out here, and it was seamless, wonderful. And my team from the Goethe Institute, Teddy Rogers, Sophie Bars, and Andrea Zell. Please show yourself. Our interpreters, Faith Sanders and Chelsea Sampson. Amazing what you're doing. I'm not sure where you take the energy from. And we're not sure whether we should thank the company that's feeding us tonight. It's called Relish. You judge for yourself after the little buffet. But once again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to us, joining us, staying with us, debating with us. And Adele. Oh, Adele. There's always someone. And there's Adele. Okay. Ich wünsche Ihnen allen einen schönen Abend, einen sicheren Nachhauseweg und alles Gute. Peace be with you. Shouldn't quote the Pope. Shouldn't be the Pope. It just came on me. Thanks so much. Enjoy the reception up in the penthouse.